Sometimes when we hit a new concept in our classical conversations math map, I get a little nervous about teaching it.
Yeah, I feel that.
This week it's rates, for my 7th grader, and I really wasn't sure where to start.
Yeah, rates, they can be tricky, huh? Because they pop up everywhere. It's like calculating speeds or comparing prices. Like when you're at the grocery store, it's not just about the numbers. It's about the relationship between them. Think about miles per hour, for example.
Yeah.
You're comparing distance, which is measured in miles, to time measured in hours.
I think that's what was tripping me up.
Oh, okay.
Because I was getting so caught up in the specific numbers.
Right.
That I was missing the bigger picture of what the rate actually represents.
Yeah.
And that relationship. The rate is a comparison of two quantities with different units.
That's exactly it. It's about how those two quantities relate to each other.
Yes.
And what's really cool is that this concept, this comparison of quantities with different units, it applies to so many things, not just speed and distance.
So you're telling me that rates aren't just about like how fast my car is going.
Exactly.
Okay. Can you give me another example that will help me really connect this to my 7th grader's world?
Okay. Imagine you're at the grocery store
Okay.
with your child and you're trying to decide which cereal is the better deal.
Oh, this is already hitting close to home. I have this dilemma every week at the store.
You've got a 10-ounce box for $3.50 and a 15-ounce box for $4.50. Which one's the better deal?
Yeah, which one is?
You can use rates to figure that out. You would calculate the price per ounce, so the unit rate for each box.
How would we actually do the math?
For the 10-ounce box, you would divide $3.50 by 10 ounces.
Which gives you a unit rate of 35 cents per ounce. For the 15-ounce box, you divide $4.50 by 15 ounces, which gives you a unit rate of 30 cents per ounce.
So even though the larger box, it costs more overall, you're actually paying less per ounce.
That's right.
Making it the better deal.
It is. It is the better deal. And this is such a great example of how understanding rates can help us make better decisions in everyday life. This resource doesn't just stop at the basics.
Okay.
They go into all different types of rates: motion, task, price, and even concentration.
I have to admit, when I hear concentration, I think back to chemistry class.
Yeah.
Which was not my favorite subject.
So how do rates fit into something like chemistry?
That's a great question. One way they connect is through reaction rates, which basically measure how quickly a chemical reaction happens.
So is that how fast baking soda and vinegar react
Exactly.
when you're making that volcano?
Yes, like a science fair project.
Yes.
The faster the reaction, the faster the eruption. And understanding rates can help us figure out how to speed up or slow down reaction, which is really important in things like medicine or manufacturing.
Wow. I'm starting to see how this seemingly simple concept of rates, it has these huge implications.
It does. It does.
Okay. So what else does this resource cover?
They even touch on something that can be a little bit of a headache for students, and I think parents too. Stoichiometry.
Oh, stoichiometry. Oh, that word just makes me want to run and hide.
I understand, but it's really not as scary as it sounds. And this breaks it down in a way that makes it like approachable.
I'm willing to give it a try, but can you give me a basic idea of what it is and how it connects to rates?
So think of stoichiometry as like a recipe for chemical reaction. It tells us the exact proportions of reactants or ingredients that we need to combine, right?
Okay.
To get the products or the outcome that we want.
Correct.
So if you're baking a cake, you need a certain ratio of flour, sugar, and eggs to get the right consistency and taste. Stoichiometry is like the recipe. And rates come into play because they affect how quickly those ingredients react with each other and how quickly that cake bakes.
So stoichiometry is all about the proportions.
Yes.
And the rates are about the speed at which those proportions interact.
That's a great way to put it. And the resource highlights how understanding rates can help us predict and control the outcome of those chemical reactions, which is huge, lots of practical applications.
That's impressive. You've convinced me. Rates are way more than just calculating speed and distance.
They are. And there's even more. This resource also goes into the philosophical side of rates.
Wait, hold on. Philosophical?
Yeah.
Are we talking about the meaning of life here?
Not quite, but they do bring up some thought-provoking ideas. They even quote C.S. Lewis, who talks about how everyone's moving toward the future at the same rate, even if it doesn't always feel that way.
That's interesting. So they're taking this mathematical concept and then they're connecting it to this deeper understanding of time
Exactly.
and our journey through life.
Yeah, recognizing that even though we might feel like we're moving at different speeds sometimes, we're all ultimately on this same journey through time.
That's a pretty powerful concept to ponder, especially for our kids. Let's dive into those teaching tips and see how we can make this concept of rates come alive for our 7th graders.
Because they give some really creative and engaging activities that you can do at home. Even. One of my favorite suggestions is they say to use a stopwatch to calculate walking speed.
Oh, that's such a good idea. It's so simple and hands-on and something that like every kid can relate to. And we already have stopwatches from all the track and field days.
You could even have your child walk different distances, time themselves, and then calculate their speed for each one.
I can just picture them now racing each other across the backyard with stopwatches in hand, trying to figure out who's the fastest.
I know, it's so fun.
And while they're doing that, we could be talking about how speed is a rate that compares distance and time.
Exactly. And you can even take it a step further and talk about the difference between speed and velocity.
Those two aren't exactly interchangeable. So isn't velocity just speed with a direction?
Yeah, that's a good way to think about it. Speed is just how fast something's moving, while velocity tells us both the speed and the direction.
So if two cars are both traveling at 60 miles per hour, but one is going north and the other is going east, they have the same speed, but different velocities.
It's like walking on a moving walkway at the airport. If you walk forward at 3 miles per hour on a walkway that's moving at 3 miles per hour, your speed relative to the walkway is 3 miles per hour. But your velocity relative to the ground is 6 miles per hour in the direction the walkway is moving.
Okay, that makes sense. Those subtle distinctions can be really important. What else does this resource suggest for teaching rates?
I also encourage analyzing graphs together. Visual learners would really like that. You could have your child track the price of gas over time, for example, and plot the data on a graph.
That's a fantastic idea. It's a real world example that directly impacts our lives. And by analyzing the graph, they can see how the price changes over time, whether it's increasing, decreasing, or staying relatively the same.
And speaking of graphs, they do a great job of explaining how to interpret distance time graphs, which I think can be a little tricky.
All the lines and the slopes, it can all get a little confusing.
It can be. But they explain how a straight horizontal line on a distance time graph indicates that the object is at rest, while a straight line sloping upwards indicates that the object's moving at a constant speed.
So the steeper the slope, the faster the object is moving.
And if you see a curved line, it means the object's speed is changing, either accelerating or decelerating.
That's actually starting to make more sense to me now. I could even see how we could turn that into a fun activity.
Yeah.
We could take a walk around the neighborhood and have my child plot our distance and time on a graph as we go.
That's a great idea.
Yeah.
It combines physical activity with learning, and it lets them actually see that connection between their movement and the graph that they create.
Yeah, I'm all about sneaking in some exercise while we learn.
Me too.
So what about the more challenging parts of rates, like combining rates? It made my head spin a little.
Oh yeah, combining rates can definitely be tricky, but it's such a practical skill to have. Think about planning a road trip, right? You have to consider different speed limits, rest stops, traffic, all that to figure out how long it's going to take you to get there. That's a classic example of combining rates.
But how do you actually do the math for that?
Formulas and step-by-step instructions, for example, how to calculate the total time it takes to complete a task if you have multiple people working on it at different rates.
So if I could finally convince my kids to actually help me with chores, I could calculate how much faster we'd finish.
And it might even motivate them to work a little faster if they see like the direct impact it has on the overall time.
Oh, I might have to try that.
It really is a foundational concept that touches so many aspects of our lives, from everyday decisions to scientific principles to even philosophical pondering. And I think the way this resource connects those dots, it's what makes it so valuable.
Absolutely. They've done a fantastic job of taking like a potentially dry subject and making it engaging and relevant and even fun. I feel so much more confident about tackling this week's math lessons now.
Oh, good. I'm glad. And speaking of tackling challenging concepts, I think we need to dedicate some time to that elephant in the room, stoichiometry. Are you ready to face it head on?
Okay, deep breath. I'm ready to give it a try, but promise you'll help me break it down in a way that my 7th grader and I can understand.
Absolutely. We can definitely demystify stoichiometry together. This resource actually does a great job of simplifying it.
Stoichiometry It's time to tackle this one head on. I'm still a little intimidated, but you made it less scary so far.
Remember we talked about stoichiometry being like a recipe for chemical reaction.
Like those baking shows where they measure everything down to the gram.
It's exactly. And just a recipe tells you how much of each ingredient you need to make a certain amount of food. Stoichiometry tells us the exact proportions of reactants needed to create a specific amount of product in a chemical reaction.
But where do rates come into this whole baking analogy?
Imagine you're baking a cake and you crank up the oven temperature higher than the recipe calls for.
Oh, I've learned that lesson the hard way. The outside burns before the inside is cooked through.
That's because you've increased the rate of the reaction. The ingredients are interacting faster at that higher temperature. And in chemical reactions, rates work the same way. They tell us how quickly the reactants are being used up. And by using the right proportions of reactants and understanding the rate of the reaction, we can optimize it to get the amount of product that we want. It's all about balance and precision.
This is starting to click for me now. It's like a delicate dance between proportions and speed.
And this resource is a really great example. They talk about how car manufacturers use stoichiometry to make sure that gasoline burns efficiently in an engine.
I would have never connected stoichiometry to something like car engines.
It's everywhere. By carefully controlling the ratio of fuel to oxygen and understanding the rate at which they react, they can maximize fuel efficiency and minimize harmful emissions.
That's incredible. It's like this one concept we're teaching our 7th graders has these like real world implications that we never even think about.
And that's what makes learning so exciting, when we can connect these seemingly abstract concepts to the things that directly impact our lives. It suddenly becomes so much more relevant.
Absolutely. I'm feeling much more equipped to tackle rates with my 7th grader now. This resource has been a game changer.
Oh, that's great. And remember, it's not about overwhelming yourself or your child with complicated formulas. It's about breaking it down and making those real-world connections, and most importantly, having fun with it.
That's great advice. I think we often forget that learning should be enjoyable, not just a chore to check off the list.
Who knows? Maybe by exploring these concepts together, you'll even discover a newfound appreciation for the elegance of math and science yourself.
That would be amazing. Maybe I'll even volunteer to help with the next science fair project.
Now we're talking. Remember, the most important thing is to foster that love of learning in your child.
A huge thank you for diving into rates with me today. This has been incredibly helpful.
Oh, it was my pleasure. Happy homeschooling.